Hi everybody, thank you very much for joining Economic Change's Salesforce Champion webinar today. We're sharing our 10 steps to becoming an impact champion today. Now these 10 steps, we've had a formula for how we support organisations to measure their impact for the last 10 years, and it seems to work really well. People like the logic, the structure and the strategy of how to think about impact measurement. So we obviously aren't delivering the whole training session today, but it will give you insight into what we cover in the 10 steps. And I'm delighted to have Becky Smith, who's Director at Culture Shift, on board, who's going to be having a conversation style webinar with me today. So I'll be looking at each of the steps, and since they came on our impact measurement course a couple of years ago, she'll be sharing her journey about what they've done at each stage and what that means to them, just so you get a bit of context as to what does it mean in practice when we look at this.
Hi, hello.
So Becky's down in Brighton, I'm down in Hastings, so I'm sure you guys are all over the place as well. So it's great to connect with you virtually. So I'm just a quick introduction as to suppose what we see as excellence in impact management and what that looks like. So the first thing that we encourage organisations to do is to have an impact framework, which is very much always a good document to have as to what we're collecting, why we're collecting it and how we're collecting it. So if you liken it to a business plan almost for your business, you know, a business plan says what does your business do, what does it sell, what are its targets. An impact framework is a similar document but all around your impact. So if somebody was to say, well, how do you measure impact? You say, well, here's your document, this explains everything. So we very much encourage people to have that framework document. Now, once you've got that in place, it's about having really good ways of monitoring all of that data and collecting it. So we encourage people to look at their monitoring processes and their tools and have a system for collecting everything real time. So you've got all the nice data analytics to hand and you can evaluate your performance. So we see these as really very much your 5 pillars of success of an impact management framework. Now, when we talk about the 10 steps and what we'll be reflecting on today, we have these 10 steps that you can see on our screen in front of you. So we start at understanding the change that you want to make and look at sort of 3 key areas there. We then talk about what is your plan of action. We help you to think about setting targets, and then we look at how you analyse and apply your impact. So they're the sort of areas that we're going to be chatting through. Now, the aspirations for many of you on the call possibly, and indeed Becky when she came on the course with her colleague, many of you want to gain clarity on what social impact means to your organisation, and that's, you know, by talking to different team members, but also your different stakeholders and your funders to think, well, what are we trying to achieve and what should we measure to demonstrate that? We then want to identify motivations for measuring impact. So actually on the workshops that we've run over many years, we've had a lot of fundraisers come on those because they're the ones that are trying to articulate their impact to funders when they apply for new funding. So that's always interesting alongside other key people. So we've got the CEOs, we've had program delivery staff, we've had trustees. All of these different people are sort of taking responsibility for thinking, well, how do we better communicate our impact to different people? Collectively, they want to develop a framework. So we always say, look, it's not always down to you to develop a framework. You're going to have the input of many people in the organisation to help you develop a framework. And what's really important is they're bought into this framework, because you can do all of this work by yourself and sit there and go, right, now we're going to measure it. But then you've got to really get people on board with it. So if you engage them from the start of the conversation and find out what their motivations are, what data they need to collect and why, and then what's the best way of collecting it, you really support that change management approach as well. So you want to improve ways of capturing and monitoring data for everybody, and then collectively as a team, as an organisation, you can evaluate your impact real time. Like that's where we sort of really help people get to in our journey with us. So Becky, do you just want to introduce Culture Shift and why you looked at impact management as a starting point?
Thank you. So Culture Shift we're a community interest company. We are based in Lewes in East Sussex. We're in a massive process of organisational change, really, re-evaluating how we measure and communicate impact, what we do as an organisation and how we operate. All of those things are obviously interconnected. Our previous strapline is putting creativity to work to create positive change, which is something that we're in the process of moving away from, but it explains very much where we've come from. We grew out of creative partnerships in Sussex and Surrey, which was an Arts Council funded programme. I don't know whether anybody has any experience of working with creative partnerships, but we were the area delivery organisation for creative partnerships in our part of the country. And Creative Partnerships was a programme that was about using partnerships between artists and schools to improve teaching and learning for young people. When Creative Partnerships came to an end, which was back in 2011, we felt that we'd developed some shared skills and processes and values, and that these were things that we could put together and put to good use to create positive change for individuals and organisations and communities. We had, rather than start, it was sort of maybe unusual for a non-profit in that rather from starting from a position of this is the cause that we want to affect, or this is the group of people we want to help, we had very clear values and ways of working. And out of this, culture shift rose like a phoenix from the ashes of Creative Partnerships, and we delivered a number of programs. Creative Cafes, which is a creative employment program looking at supporting young people to work in the creative industries. We have Arts Connect, which is a learning disability arts program, which is about improving people's confidence, reducing social isolation, improving well-being more generally for learning disabled adults through the arts. And then we have arts programs that we run in schools, which are about improving well-being and mental health outcomes for young people. And we also do consultancy work in evaluation, creative facilitation and consultation. So there's quite a lot of stuff, quite a broad range of things going on there that we do. And interestingly, we support other organisations in evaluation to look at their impact. Although that was something that we had a lot of experience from Creative Partnerships and experience that we've developed through Culture Shift in supporting other organisations to measure and understand impact, it was something we found that with our own programs, we were struggling a little to find the time and the headspace to do that really well for our own work. Somehow that had been neglected. So in terms of where we are at the moment, as I've said, this is a period of organisational change. So this is still very much a work in progress, and I'm sort of sharing our thinking processes here rather than presenting something which is complete or ideal. I think we were lucky to have been awarded last year a grant from the Arts Council for organisational development, which has allowed us a little bit of space within the organisation to do some of this important organisational development work. And impact is very much at the heart of it, but it runs alongside a number of other things we're doing. So we've worked with Economic Change through their Supermums programme to develop our own Salesforce instance, which has been really helpful. We've been also working with a consultant, Emma Inslee, on our strategic plan. And one of the things that's come out of this is being able to zoom out and look at our organisation. We've been thinking about our strategy and our approach to fundraising. We've been thinking about, would we be better becoming a charity? And if we do, what would we need to do to achieve that? We've been thinking about our governance structures. We've been thinking about finances. We've been working towards coming up with a strategic plan. But one of the things that's come out of this process, which has been surprisingly difficult for us and does feel like it's also the key to understanding impact and also driving a lot of the changes that we need to make in the organisation, is really understanding and defining our purpose. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a minute, but I'll hand you back to Heather for now.
Brilliant. So I think many might resonate that measuring impact is a job in its own right quite often, and does require quite a bit of thought process and people's input. So it is always going to be work in progress, but it does require time and budget, and making sure that you've got that planned out is the first bit. I'd always say, you know, when people have come on our workshop, we say, right, we're going to give you a load of stuff you've got to think about in half a day, but this might take you another year or 2 years. I mean, our journey with you, Becky, has been like a couple of years now. So,
yeah.
You know, it's not all going to happen overnight. It's about coming up with a really good plan and strategy for sort of developing it. So we'll give you an insight as to what the 10 steps might be, and then obviously you can create your own project plan internally about which steps have you got, and you can tick off and say, yep, we've sorted that, we know that. Or which steps might you need to work on. I suppose that's the way to really think about, what's the output from this webinar today. So step one is about understanding social impact. Like, what does it mean to your organisation? So when I talk about understanding social impact, there is the obvious thing about if you have beneficiaries and you're working with them, what is the impact of the services on them? But also there's other kind of key areas here that you might think about. One is around customer satisfaction generally. Like, every organisation has a responsibility to understand whether the service met an expected quality and was delivered at a level that was expected of them. So I always liken it to say that if you're helping somebody into a job and they got a job and that the impact was, did somebody secure employment, it's always worth checking, well, what was the level of quality of support they were given? Did they feel that quality was really high and as high as you'd like it to be? And the other key area to think about with social impact and what it might mean is also about how ethical you are as an organisation, and look at, do we deliver things ethically? Do we think about how we, our local supply chains, our commitment to environmental practices, and all of those other ethical credentials that were quite, hot on sort of looking at bigger corporates and going, well, how, ethical are they and where they spend their money versus how ethical are we as a small organisation? So I'll hand back over to Becky to just talk about how you looked at social impact within your organisation.
So I think in terms of our programs, we found ourselves in a position where we know that we make an impact to people because we see it around us every day. But a lot of what we know and what we accept as our impact, we find it difficult to measure. We've traditionally found it quite difficult to measure. Part of that is because of the stakeholders, the particular stakeholders we work with, and some of the difficulties there are in collecting very meaningful data on feedback and impact for them. So we're always interested in looking at ways that we can work with our service users to understand what they get from our programs. A lot of our work has very soft outcomes, so we know that what we do is we reduce social isolation, we increase people's well-being and confidence, but developing indicators that allow us to measure that in a really meaningful way, and then collection methods that we know are reliable, is something that we've traditionally struggled to do. There's a certain amount of complexity within a very small organisation in that we run different programs. So we do stuff around employment, we do stuff with young people, we do stuff with learning disabled adults, we do stuff with children in schools. So there's a lot of different things going on there. And what we've tended to do traditionally is just gather masses and masses of data and then not always really know what to do with it, and not really have a clear plan of how we analyse and use that to have a real solid intelligence around impact within the organisation. And another level of complexity there is that each of these different programs obviously has different funders. Some of those are local authority commissioned projects, so local authorities tend to have a certain set of impact data that they want us to collect, and we're also reporting to grant funders as well. So we knew we were making a difference on the ground, but how to make sense of what we had felt quite challenging. So that's where we started from.
And I think, Becky, you're not probably in a different place to a lot of other people there, are you, really? Because I think quite often we see non-profits are collecting data, specifically around funder requirements on specific services. So what you end up is lots of great data, like you say, which you definitely need, but it's about how do we analyse this as an organisation and create, I suppose what we very much encourage is, well, how do you communicate what you do as an organisation, and how can you systemise some outcomes and outputs that are uniform across your different services and programs, so then at least you can I always talk about a trunk with branches, if you like. You've kind of got your trunk of data, which is always going to be a consistent data collection across whatever service or program you're running. So you can use those stats to say, well, as an organization, we've achieved this, but then your branches are going to respectively mirror different services or projects, which are going to have their own indicators, because they might be, as you've got quite a lot of different beneficiary groups, for example. So in order to help people think through, well, how do we consolidate? That's exactly what we're going to be just reflecting on in the next steps, really. So the second step is stakeholder mapping, like who is interested and involved in impact measurement, and that could be all your different beneficiaries, it could be your funders, it could be any partners, it could be your volunteers. It's about anybody who's interested and what is it they want to know. So, if your organisation is very much looking at building a team of volunteers, the volunteers are going to want to hear impact, because that's what gets them excited about volunteering. They want to hear how many people you're supporting and what the stories are about how you've helped those people, because then they'll sort of get excited and go, oh right, brilliant, yeah, I definitely want to volunteer for this organisation. So it's lots of different stakeholders. So Becky, talk to us about how you define your stakeholders and how you went about that.
Yeah, so the stakeholders that we always think of first, I think, are service users. So there are quite a few different service user groups that we work with: learning disabled adults, young people, children with mental health problems I've talked about. We also recognise that amongst those service users, there can be issues around really measuring authentically the voice of those people and the impact that services have on them. So that's something that we're always thinking about. We also know that our services are valued by carers and parents and families, and by the professionals that work with people as well. So that's professionals in adult social care. We've worked with professionals in early years, practitioners as well, and teachers, and also businesses through our employment programs. And because our work is about harnessing learning from the arts to improve people's lives, we also work with lots of artists and independent practitioners as well. Through creative partnerships, we had developed a method of triangulating all these different approaches. So our work happens in the space between the professionals and the artists and the service users, and then there's also, just to add a layer to it, the parents and families and carers as well. So that's service users. Sorry, can I just go back a little bit?
Yeah, sorry.
I'm talking I'm talking lots. So as I said before, we've also got partners that we work with, we've also got funders, and we were very aware that whatever we came up with as a solution, impact solution for our organisation, had to work for staff and not overburden staff, because we are a small and under-resourced, as many non-profits are, a small and under-resourced organisation.
Step 3, defining the cause. So once you've kind of defined the stakeholders and understood what they're wanting to know and see, step 3 is then looking at what is the cause that we're tackling and what statistics are out there that show the gravity of the issue. And again, that can kind of give you some useful indicators to think about, well, these are the indicators and that are out there that show the issues in society or the environment, depending on what you're dealing with. And can we introduce some outcomes and output indicators that will reflect and relate to those? Handing back to Becky around, how did you define your cause, Becky?
So for the beneficiary groups that we work with, we have used quite a lot of existing data that's gathered by and managed by other people. So there are social deprivation indices for the geographical neighbourhoods that we work in. We use Dimensions UK's work on learning disability and the challenges faced by that community. And we've also worked with CAMS around young people and mental health. We're also looking at ways of measuring and models for tackling social isolation, so that we can base our organisation's understanding of impact in something that's bigger than culture shift, to make sure that we're working in the right way and to give us more credibility with funders. Our vision is quite broad, I think, still, which is that as a result of working with us in the arts, people are happier and more connected with a stronger sense of their identity and purpose. So I think there is still some ongoing work and thinking within the organisation about how we bridge the gap between the vision that we have of what we do and how that actually changes people's lives on the ground. But that's something that that's a process that we're working through at the moment.
So step 4. So this goes back to thinking about our plan of action. So moving on to the next stage of thought process. So what is your vision for change? And for this, I ask people to revisit what is their mission statement or their vision. And the main thing is it smart, in a sense that if you communicated your vision to somebody, could you prove that you have actually delivered on this vision in a year's time or 2 years' time? Like, is it, are you able to collect tangible evidence to produce it? So that's what I always say is the sense check, really. So what are you trying to achieve? So Becky, where did you get to in terms of talking about this as a team?
So this is where we, in parallel with the work that we've been doing with economic change and bringing in Salesforce, we've also been working with a consultant about our organisational strategy. What we found as a result of that process is that we're really clear about our values. Those are kind of deeply held and shared within the organisation, and I won't go into them in lots of detail, but they're around creativity, fairness, connection, effectiveness, and visibility, and they're all things that run through everything that we do. We feel that we're fairly clear about the how of what we do. So we know that we work cross-sector to develop programs that improve people's lives, and we know how we do that and what kind of actions we take to do that. And we have this vision of the future, which I'm not sure is completely smart yet, but is a high level vision, which is that people are happier and more connected with a stronger sense of their identity and purpose. In terms of our purpose, we have really struggled as an organisation to articulate that in a very simple way. So we know that we're about connecting people through the arts, but in terms of the change that makes, is that about tackling inequality? Is that about reducing isolation? Is that about improving well-being? And each of these things, as we look at it, feels like it's part of the story, but not quite the whole thing yet. So that is still something that we are working through. I mean, it's really strange to go through this process of asking these sort of quite difficult questions and realize lots of assumptions that we'd held within the organization about what we do and what we stand for and who we work with that felt quite clear, but when you actually start unpicking those things and really questioning them, coming up with something that really across the organization and across all of the different programs that we run that we can all sign up to has been quite challenging. So I'm going to leave that there for now.
Great, thanks, Becky. And I think, that other kind of key reflection is can you prove it? You've all got a clear vision. Everybody in a non-profit, I feel, as an organisation, you've got a vision and a mission about what we're trying to do. But at the end of the day, you all want to know whether you've achieved that or not at the end of the day. So I think some of the things that will come up, I think, later on in your slides, which you've reflected on during this process is, well, how do we find out if people are happier and more connected? Like, what questions do we ask of them in order for us to sort of get a sense that if we went home tonight, we know that we've made people happier and more connected? So we can come on to those as I think as we move through. So step 5 is tackling the cause. So here we ask people to clearly communicate, well, what are your services and products? And again, I think this is where it nicely sort of, I always say people to reflect, this should tally with whatever is in your business plan at the end of the day, because your business plan for an organization is, we are delivering these services, and then we'll go on to also, the quantity of those services. So we won't get into that just yet. But if we just to summarize again, I think, Becky, you've got your key services here, haven't you?
Yeah, so we have 3 main programs, as I've said before, and then we also do consultancy work as well. So what we wanted to do was come up with a series of organisation-wide KPIs that would cover all of these things.
And then step 6 very much builds on this, really, is like, what are your outputs? So if you think about in a business plan, you'll say, right, you know, if we go back to Becky's services here, creative cafes, sort of our question is, well, how many creative cafes are you going to be delivering this year? How many people do you expect to get on those cafes? You know, what age groups might there be in those cafes? You know, what is the scale of your programs and services? And that very much relates to your outputs. That's what we talk about when we talk about outputs. So Becky, do you want to just share what you came up with in terms of your types of outputs that you measure across programs?
Yeah. So we already gathered a lot of information on who was using our services. Before we started this process, that was held in a number of different formats and spreadsheets and reported to funders in various different ways. So working with economic change and bringing in our Salesforce instance has allowed us to think about standardizing some of those units of how we collect outputs. So across all the different work that we do, we have been able to simplify our work into it's either an event, it's either a one-off thing that we do. So we run lots of events. So creative cafes are events. We run Get Connected events as part of our Arts Connect program. We do lots of different kinds of events. We also run courses, so programs of work where, for example, learning disabled adults take part in a film course or a music course over a series of weeks, or young people in a school who have been identified by their teachers as needing extra support attend a course of our wellbeing programs. So being able to break down our work into those units has allowed us to get a better understanding of who we're reaching in terms of attendance. This is not understanding the impact of those services. This is just working out who we are, who we're getting through the door and who we're reaching. It has given us an organisation-wide KPI, which is helping us to understand, to compare those different offers and to understand the effectiveness of our marketing in terms of who we're reaching. So we've got in our Salesforce system, we look at we look at capacity on courses and capacity at events, and we look at how many bookings we've got and how many attendees we've got, and that is giving us data on which of these services are doing well and which of these services are perhaps not quite positioned in a way that we're getting people to them at the moment. So that has been really helpful. It's not all about numbers, obviously. It's not all about quantity. It's about quality of engagement as well. But it's good to have some sort of idea of scale. And we've also done some work on sort of, and this again is the sort of technical end of it, of standardizing between registered and unregistered users, because we've implemented this as part of our Salesforce. So we're looking at, there are people that we have a lot of contact with over time, service users that go through our programs and then take part in lots of different activities with us. But there are also people who maybe just turn up at one of our events, but we don't have a sort of longer term contact with them. And it's trying to have sort of standardized ways across the organisation of gathering those numbers that we can use in a meaningful way. Hope that helps. Feels like there's quite a lot in there.
Absolutely. And I think just the thing to add on there, which was the interesting conversation we had during this, was around demographics of all of this as well, because with the GDPR kind of new guidance and with every client, to be honest, we're having a conversation around, can you hold the demographic data against the contact record? So would you know that Joe is British, white, 22, for example? Are you allowed to collect that data, or does it need to be sat an anonymous object, which still would give you the demographics for a program? So you could potentially still say, well, we've had this many percentage of ethnic breakdown or this many of percentage age groups by program, but you just don't know that that person is Joe, so to speak. So we had a good conversation around that, didn't we? But that tallies in with outputs, doesn't it, Becky?
Yes, definitely. So the solution we came up with was to have an equal opportunities object which gathers information that we're using for reporting, but we also have quite a lot of demographic information attached to contacts as well, because that's needed to course leaders, for example, need that information. So it's working out where different bits of information need to be for what we're using those for. It's been really interesting. It's really helped to clarify a lot of our processes of collecting information, and the GDPR requirement, in some ways that makes it more difficult, but it also requires us to be clearer, which I think is ultimately helpful.
Okay, great. So step 7, so the bit that we're all obviously interested in predominantly, is what is the change? So, you're delivering all these services, you've kind of got all these kind of key, you've been going through the thought process of what data are we collecting and why, how is it going to help us serve our cause, show that we've achieved our mission, meet stakeholder needs. What we're doing in step 7 is basically collating all of those indicators that you've kind of thought through and thought what's important to different people. And within step 7, you start to prioritize, like, okay, so now we're here, step 7, what are the indicators we're really going to focus on? And we talk about the journey of somebody. So you've got your short to long term outcomes. Your short is your outcome that's immediately going to happen as a result of an intervention. The medium term outcome is what do you want them to do next following your support with them, and the long term might be achieved over 1 or 2 years period, depending again on your organization. So we talk about that journey. So Becky, just kind of share with us a little bit about how that resonated with you.
So as part of our strategic planning, working on from our thinking around purpose and mission and vision, we have developed these 4 focus areas for the organisation, which are balanced scorecard areas. So rather than just looking at service delivery, we wanted to broaden that out to look at the organisational health as a whole. So we're looking at our visibility, our infrastructure, our financial sustainability, and also how effective project delivery is. We've used those focus areas to develop 2 or 3 overarching goals, and then those we've used to develop 6 SMART objectives, which have organisation-wide KPIs for each of those areas. So that is how we've tied the whole thing together. I think the key thing for us in terms of understanding impact across all these different programs and making everything tie together is that if we look at our Creative Cafes program, we want to be able to understand to what extent the participants in that, who will be young people in secondary schools, are stronger and more connected. So everything we're doing, we're pulling back to happier, stronger, and more connected. Some of our programs may just address one of those areas. So the well-being programs often address happiness in some form of well-being. So how well kids are getting on at school, how able they are to deal with their emotions. And there will also be resilience measures in there that we talk about around stronger. So things like confidence, things like coping skills, and more connected would be things like how people are getting on in organizations, or how kids are functioning in their families. So the specific indicators for that group of beneficiaries will need to be designed for that specific group of beneficiaries. But sorry, this feels really complicated. What we've done is we've grouped those indicators so that they are happier, stronger, and more connected, if that makes sense. Are you following me, Heather?
Yeah, that's what, yeah, because you're working on that, haven't you? You've just revised them, I think, which is on a later slide.
So this is where we're getting to. Overall, we'll be able to standardize across all of our work and say, to what extent does our work make people feel happier? To what extent is it making them stronger in terms of what that means for that beneficiary group? And to what extent is it helping them to become more connected? Shall I leave it there for now?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point for me to just drop in, is that if you like there, it very much tallies with your original sort of vision, is like that
Yeah,
happiness, connected, whatever. And then the thing is, they're your kind of broad outcome areas that you want to see change. So what you've come up with, and indeed sort of I, worked and saw within what you'd put together was, a set of indicators that correlate to that,
yeah,
and demonstrate that. And I think the important point here as well is that when you've got an organization works with different beneficiary groups, it's great to have some high level outcomes like happiness and connected, because happiness and connected, for in culture shifts term, somebody who's got a disability and is maybe suffering from social isolation, there's going to be some indicators there that are quite distinct to that beneficiary group. Whereas when you're working with kids in schools, happy and connected will have a different set of indicators. Culture Shift as an organisation will want to be able to say at the end of the year that 70% of people reported they were happier. Now, if you were to really dig down into the detail about that, you might 30% of those might be of the certain beneficiary group, and they might have a set of indicators that said they were happier, versus another beneficiary group where they had their own set of indicators that meant they were happier. But that 70% overall, you can say were happier. If you want to know how they were happier, here's the breakdown of the indicators that sit beneath it. So I think it's really great, your example there, Becky, in terms of how you've created the high level outcomes.
thank you.
But
It's
then,
trying to map something
so
that's quite complex, and meet our requirements of reporting to funders, because in terms of what funders want to know, a lot of the time what they want to know is they might have specific indicators that fall into those three groups: happier, stronger, and more connected, that they're looking. So if the fund is around social isolation, they'll want us, with a particular beneficiary group, they'll want us to be reporting on that quite specifically. But we also need to have something that operates across the whole of the organization. So that's where a lot of the thinking has gone into finding a model that does both of those things, that operates at those different levels.
brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. So if you go back to the trunk and the branch sort of philosophy, in your impact framework, you'd have what are our organizational outcomes, which might be really high level. And then you might say, what are our indicators that we could potentially, our outcome indicators that we could track across all programs? And then what are the specific outcome indicators for a specific program and a specific beneficiary group? But overarchingly, it's really great as an organisation. You could say 70% of people we've worked with this year are happier and 60% are more connected. But in your impact report, you'd tell stories about, well, how are they more happier and more connected through, your qualitative case studies or video testimonials, plus some indicators that are specific to that programme and the work that you're doing with them. So it's absolutely all going the right direction. So if we're moving on to step 8 now, you've kind of defined what you're collecting. The next is, well, how do you collect this data? What digital tools do you use to collect data? And, I know that certain funders and certain organisations and certain beneficiary groups will always require paper-based or a different way to be, even more creative ways of collecting data. Going digital might mean that you can use digital tools with your beneficiaries to collect data in some senses, or it might mean that as an organization you're using systems and tools to collect data, maybe through your staff. Becky, just talk us through sort of how you've applied digital tools and how that's helped you.
So historically, we've had lots of different systems for gathering data, different systems for each programme. Some of the local authority commission services had their own bespoke spreadsheets that they wanted data reported back to them in specific formats, which I'm sure that's something that everybody is familiar with, and other funders have other different requirements, but the local authority ones tended to be more onerous. And we've also had lots and lots and lots of paper-based systems, lots of different feedback forms. And because some of our beneficiaries don't write and don't fill in forms, we have also used lots of creative methods. So if you go to a Culture Shift event, there'll be lots of writing on tablecloths, lots of videoing, lots of people sticking things on, using little pegs on long strings of washing lines. Lots of different things will be going on, that to try and collect service users impressions and feelings about an event without asking everybody to fill in a feedback form. So one of the challenges has been how we then analyze all of that data that we get back. We end up with a lot of stuff, and it's in all different formats. So some of it will be photographic, some will be video, some of it will be things that we can turn into statistics, or we can count, or we can analyze in some way. But it has traditionally been quite a lot of data. We're looking at how we bring that into our Salesforce instance at the moment. And again, it's about counting. A lot of it is about counting against certain indicators that are being grouped again under these three headings of happier, stronger, and more connected. The other way in which we are using digital means of collecting information is via Eventbrite. We've been using Eventbrite for quite a long time for organising events and taking bookings. So we've integrated that with Salesforce. So that means that we are getting quite a lot of our output information directly from Eventbrite. And we could look at other ways of, we're interested in looking at other integration with other digital systems as well, but I think I'll probably leave that till the end under next steps, if that's okay, Heather.
Great. So just as an end note here, I think it's using a system does normally encourage, if not force, a way of systemizing your feedback forms as well. So quite often we go into an organization and we look at their different services, and their feedback forms will be asking the same question in a slightly different way each time, with different pick list values and different questions. And what it really does, and what the value of that is it gets everybody to think, well, actually, what are the standard questions that we should be asking across all feedback forms? So, because then it goes into one field in the database, and you know where to look for that data analytics. So it really just helps systemize things. So once you've got all of this great data, it's all in a system, you can see real-time impact. Within step 9, we're actually talking about evaluating that impact. And so how do you evaluate and improve what you do? And this is where you might evaluate and do more anecdotal interviews, or random sampling, focus groups, as well as obviously your feedback forms that you're doing. But it's about, well, how do we use that data to improve on what we do? And we also get involved as an organisation in that evaluation work, like Culture Shift do. We help go in and evaluate other people's data and actually be that independent voice on it. And I think, what I love is taking a client from A to Z, and that, I know that they've got a system and all of that data, because it means that we can walk in and see all their data real time, as opposed to like, looking at different spreadsheets and trying to sort of collate that data. And that was really my whole motivation for setting up Economic Change 13 years ago, was to, help organizations make their impact measurement process so much smoother. It's the reason what we do today, and it's why we sort of have this formula, really, is to sort of get you from A to Z in that process. So Becky, just talk to us about your evaluating process.
I think this is another one that I've interpreted slightly differently. So this slide, I've just written some notes on where we are in our process of understanding what we've done so far around impact, and how we have standardized that across the organization. We did a lot of that work you're talking about looking at our different feedback forms across different programs, the different data we were collecting across different programs, and standardizing that. Even so, when we started rolling out our Salesforce instance, it was clear that the feedback object was too complex really for people to use effectively. So our next phase, as I've been saying, is to simplify all of that user feedback into 3 responses, and that will make it easier for us to report across the organisation. We do lots of other forms of evaluating in programs, and a lot of that work is qualitative, I would say. So we spend a lot of time talking to people, we do focus groups, we do interviews with carers and participants. The way we approach evaluating specific projects a lot of the time is about just understanding and telling the story of a project. So we often use a case study looking at the impact on a particular individual and how they've developed as a result of being involved with our work. And then I find that the sort of harder statistical information is really great in terms of bolstering that story and giving us that real proof and credibility that we're doing what we say we're doing.
And I think that leads us probably nicely into step 10, is that it's about, applying your impact. So what I normally encourage at the sort of final step is to go, right, well, figure out what you've done out of these 10 steps already. Think about what you need to go away and sort of work on more, which I know Becky can share in a moment about where they are and what's next for them. But it's also about using, obviously, everything you're doing. If we go back to originally the motivations for this, like why are you going to focus on sorting out your 10 steps, and thinking that we've got this whole framework in place, we're collecting all the data really nicely, we can see all the data real time. Is then using that data, one, to evaluate and improve what you do, so to tweak your services, but the other is to use that data for fundraising, or for getting quality standard marks, or for doing your media and press releases, or whatever it is that you need to do. So step 10 is all about applying that impact in the ways that was the original intention, because that makes it useful to people. And having worked with a lot of I've worked in the field and had to get a team collecting data, sometimes for them it can be a bit of an admin chore, because you're like, oh gosh, it's another piece of paper I've got to fill in, or it's another form that we've got to collect data on. But if you give them back all of this useful data in a way that they can see how it's helping you to fundraise, or it's allowing you to communicate in media, what the work that you're doing and the importance of it, or it's helping you achieve awards in the sector for what you're doing, then they'll get it, they'll really buy into it. So it's just really about making it not an administrative task, but about making it really, really important to what you do. And actually that's the first thing that they want to do, is collect that data for you, and to share it. So Becky, just talk us through your next steps and how you really see, how is this collecting all this data really going to help your organisation?
So I think I've put some notes here on next steps in terms of what we want to do next around digital data collection. So we're really excited at how we can, in the next phase of this project, can start collecting data more effectively on the ground. So rather than translating a lot of the kind of the creative stuff that we do in events and courses into something that we can then collect and report on, looking at how we can integrate some digital means of collecting that feedback live. So we're talking about using iPads in events and getting more feedback directly from teachers and other staff involved in our programs, and having that fed directly into the system. In terms of where we're going as an organisation with impact, it really is about that sort of continual cycle of strategic planning for the organisation. So we want to know in what way our programs are really helping people, what we can continually adjust and change to improve our impact. And we know that that's what funders need to know from us as well. So we're hoping that this will be the beginning of a sort of ongoing cycle. And I think you're absolutely right what you said, Heather. It's often historically this kind of work has been understood as sort of monitoring and evaluation, and I think that it does often feel quite difficult for staff. We want this to be something that motivates staff, because it gives them a way of really understanding how our services are valued.
Lovely. Okay, thanks very much, Becky. I think it's been really useful to talk through sort of those steps and really sort of put it in reflection of an organisation as well. So it's been perfect, and we're spot on nearly an hour now. So that's great timing for us as well. So I hope that's been really useful. Please do write any questions down in the chat if you want to just hang on for a few minutes and ask any questions to Becky or myself. I'm just monitoring that now. In terms of obviously the process we've gone through with Becky, from them coming on an impact measurement workshop to us helping them implement Salesforce, that's everything that we can support you with as an organisation. So please do get in touch if you've kind of got a leaner budget and you want training in how to use Salesforce yourself, so you can actually build out your system yourself. Then we do also just train people up in Salesforce admin and support you a little bit in thinking about, well, how could impact measurement work within your organisation. So, do give us a shout if we can help you with any of that, or you can become part of our Salesforce Champion membership group, which is where we do fortnightly study groups, monthly training webinars and biannual events, where we really get people in the room and sort of talk through scenarios, different Salesforce functionality, and how you can really make things work for you on a group level. So thanks very much for joining today and listening through the 10 steps. Happy to answer any questions after the call as well. Obviously, if you want to reach out to us. But thank you very much for joining. I don't see, there's no questions pinging out right now. So I'll take that as that's been quite informative and you're mulling through all the information. So thanks, Becky, for your time.
Thank you, Heather.
And input, and I hope you all have a great afternoon.